I'm Kiki. I'm an editor here at Goop, and welcome to Goop Book Club. We're so excited to have you. If this is your first time, a little bit about Goop Book Club. Every month we pick a book to read together. We have a Facebook group where we chat throughout the month. You can always find more and all the details at goop.com/goopbookclub. We are coming from you live, and our author, who I'll bring on in a moment, will be taking questions, so feel free to drop questions into the comment box. Apologies in advance for any tech glitches. I think we won't have any today because, as you can see, for once, I am not in my little apartment. I'm at the Goop office in our library, and our wonderful head of video, Chase, has me all set up. The library, I have to say, this is my favorite place in the office. I think I was counting earlier, and we have like 15 books on forest bathing, which is very unusual for such a library of such a small size, but kind of proud of it. Today is a very exciting one for a number of reasons. We have our first brand partner who's joined us on Goop Book Club, which is Michael Kors. I'm a big fan of the brand. I have been pining after a pair of squarish glasses for a while, and I got hooked up with these, which I adore, and they've been going everywhere with me in my books. I don't know if you can see, but they have this cute gold logo charm situation on the side. They come in black, which I've always wanted to be cool enough to have a pair of glasses, and I finally decided, you know what, just go out and get them. But they also come in Michael Kors signature brown, and we'll drop a link in the comments. You can check out, they're called the Sitka frames. They're beautiful, and we'll drop a comment in the section if you're like me and you need reminders to go and get your eyes checked. You can go to your local lens crafters and do that. You can also find the Sitka frames at lens crafters online. And honestly, going to get my eyes checked and getting a pair of glasses just sounds like the ideal December afternoon to me, which probably says a lot about me. But thank you, Michael Kors and team, for these great Sitka glasses. Now, I'm very excited to introduce our author today, Elizabeth Strout. Elizabeth Strout is a New York Times bestselling author and a Pulitzer Prize winning author. She is beloved for books like Olive Kitteridge, Amy and Isabel, My Name is Lucy Barton. This is a very, very, very small footnote in Liz's extraordinary bio, but probably one of my biggest regrets is that I didn't get to take a class with Liz when she was a visiting teacher at my college many years ago. But maybe someday I can go back to school and take a class with Liz somewhere. Liz's latest book, which of course we've been reading for Goop Book Club, is Oh, William. And we've been reading this for November and December. We decided to span 2 months because it's such a great book. There's so much to discuss. And it's the end of the year. So in this book features Lucy Barton, one of Liz's beloved characters, and her ex-husband, William. And they go on an adventure together to discover something about a family secret from William's family and his past. And it's a book that asks the question, can we really ever know someone else? Can we really ever know ourselves? And maybe more important, where does the value lie in the mysteries in other people, in our relationships, in ourselves? I absolutely loved it. To my mind, this is one of the most memorable voices in fiction ever, and it is such a thrill and an honor to get to talk to Liz today. So Liz, thank you for being here with us for Goop Book Club, and please come onto the screen.
Hi, thank you so much for having me here. I wish I had a pair of Michael Kors glasses, but I don't.
Liz, we'll have to get you on. Thank you so much for being here today. It's so wonderful to see you.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to be here. Thank you.
And Liz, you agreed, you said you would read us a passage. Do you mind starting with that?
No, I'm just going to read, it's not very long, don't worry. It won't go on forever at all, but sort of toward the beginning of the book where William is walking to work. Anyway, he enjoyed this daily walking, even though he noticed that he was not as fast as the young people who bumped past him with their bags of food, or their strollers with 2 kids, or their spandex tights and earbuds in their ears, their yoga mats on a piece of elastic slung over their shoulders. He took heart in the fact that he could pass many people, the old man with a walker, or a woman who used a cane, or even just a person his age who seemed to move more slowly than he did. And this made him feel healthy and alive and almost invulnerable in a world of constant traffic. He was proud that he walked more than 10,000 steps a day. William felt almost invulnerable, is what I am saying here. Some days on these mornings, walks, he would think, oh God, I could be that man over there in the wheelchair, sitting in the morning sun in Central Park, in aid on a bench, typing on her cell phone as the man's head dropped forward on his chest. Or he could be that one with an arm twisted from a stroke, a gait uneven. But then William would think, no, I am not those people. And he was not those people. He was, as I have said, a tall man to whom age had not added extra weight, a man who still had his hair, white now but full, and he was William. And he had a wife, his third, 22 years younger than he was, and that was no small thing. But at night, he often had terrors.
Thank you. That's one of my favorite because I feel like you do such a great job of showing just in that short walk to work how he was feeling about his life and where he was in his life at that moment. And I think
Yeah,
we all have those moments where we're on this short walk, a walk we do every day, and it's almost like we're comparing ourselves to everyone that we're seeing, and
yeah,
it's a way of kind of positioning us in the world. And so thank you
exactly.
for picking that one. How did you
Well,
decide to return to Lucy and William, who are obviously characters that you've written about before? And I'm curious too about your decision because this is Lucy's stories and it's William's story as well, but it's Lucy telling William's story in a way. And I'm curious about how you decided ultimately to revisit them and then to tell the story in the way that you chose to
right.
do it.
From her point of view. Right. Well, the story actually came to me during rehearsal. Laura Linney played in a one woman show on Broadway and also in London in My Name is Lucy Barton. And I was at a rehearsal and she did something. It was just an odd moment, but so weird. And she did something. She murmured something about William, and she took a step across the stage and put her glasses up on top of her head. And at that moment, I literally saw the words, "Oh, William." And it was just so interesting to me. And that was the moment I thought, okay, William is going to have his story. Because in My Name is Lucy Barton, Lucy very directly tells the reader, I'm not going to talk about my marriage. But then all of a sudden I thought, but let's get William's story. So I wrote a few drafts from his point of view, third person. And then I realized, this has to be Lucy telling the story of William. And so I went back to Lucy's voice, which thank goodness was still accessible to me. And I began to write the book. And what was so interesting for me is that so much of it was already there in a strange way, because even though in My Name is Lucy Barton, she doesn't talk about her husband, we do know in that book that he was the son of a German prisoner of war who had run off with the potato farmer's wife. He'd been sent to Holton, Maine to work in a potato farm as a prisoner of war. And that we know that he ran off with that wife, the potato farmer's wife. And so we knew that. And then I realized that in My Name is Lucy Barton, the only mention I really made too much of her mother-in-law was that when her mother-in-law would introduce her to people, she would say, "This is my daughter-in-law, Lucy. Lucy comes from nothing." And that ended up really clicking in my head. And I thought, okay, let's do this. So
And I'm curious when you said about accessing Lucy's voice, because that's what it felt to me. That you're accessing her voice. Where do you go from? Like, is that pieces of conversations you're pulling from? Because I mean, in a way, all memorable characters, right? What we remember about them in a sense is their voice. But Lucy to me had such a specific voice. And
exactly.
I'm probably in the rare camp that Oh, William was actually the first of the Lucy Barton books that I read.
Okay.
And then I went back
Yeah.
and read My Name is Lucy Barton and Anything is Possible. And it was such a treat for me because it's so I do love a good series. I love a good series, don't get me wrong. But there is something about you read a book, a novel, and it's such a singular moment. But oftentimes you really miss the characters and you want to see them again. But I think what's interesting to me about reading these three as close together as I did was they were all such complete stories, but then there was these little gems and surprises that tie them together. And I'm just curious, how did you go back and access Lucy's voice? And then how did you like the puzzle pieces come together to you? Like I'm picturing this like master spreadsheet where you're like, and then this is the name and this is going to come back here, but yeah, how does your mind work around voice and then tying together these different aspects of the characters and their plot line?
Yeah. Well, Lucy Barton's voice arrived one day, and I was not sure that I was going to write that book because I have never written in first person except for the prologue to the Burgess Boys. There's a first person prologue, but nobody ever remembers that because nobody remembers the prologue. But anyway, the point is, I was nervous about doing first person because when you write from first person, you can only show things from their point of view, and you have to have other people reflecting back to them, I mean, to you, the reader, who that person might be. And so that was a bit of a challenge, but her voice came to me so strongly, and it was like a fine gold thread that seemed to sort of come from above. And it was my job to stay with that fine gold thread and be truthful to it throughout My Name is Lucy Barton. And that was a really interesting book for me to write. And then as I was writing that about the visit with her mother in the hospital, I got very interested in the different people that they were talking about, she and her mother. And so I would literally move around to the other part of the table that I work on, and I would write little scenes. And I would think, well, what did happen to those pretty nicely girls? You know, and so I would write some scenes. And so by the time My Name is Lucy Barton was done, I almost had another book called Anything is Possible. But I wasn't sure that I was going to go back at all until Laura Linney did that thing that was so helpful and sort of blew it all up for me. And then I didn't go back to read My Name is Lucy Barton, but I heard her voice in my head still, and I hope was able to capture that voice.
No, you totally did. And I loved there was a passage with there's a moment with William where he's saying Lucy is trying to guess at or to explain why William married her, why he chose her. And he ends up saying, it was because of you had this surprising and unexpected joy. And he says something like, you were a spirit. And there was this moment earlier
Yeah,
when she had been trying to explain to him how she had this sudden, it wasn't deja vu, it was like a vision almost that she
yeah,
she felt like she knew was unfolding. And he was like, you're a spirit, like you move between worlds. And that's how I really
right.
felt, like I was like, yes, William, that was such a good way of describing her because she was
Exactly, because he's
such a
William. He's a scientist, and so he thinks in terms of science, but he knows her well enough, and he's loved her, long enough to recognize, excuse me, that there is something special about her. And as soon as I wrote that line, I married you because you were filled with joy, I realized, course, of course, Lucy is filled with joy, in spite of the, severity of her background. She just was born with joy in her, and who knows why. And that was a really important line for me to write, and I realized, got it.
I think the other thing about Lucy as a first person narrator that made her so interesting to me was her almost obsession with wanting to know other people and knowing also that there was always going to be something that she couldn't know and wanting to explore that. Because I feel like for me, I love books where there's like alternate plot lines and alternate universes, and like a character does one thing and then they become something else, because I'm always like obsessed with this idea that we can't be all the things at once, like we
Exactly.
so yeah, I don't know. And that was something to me that I noticed after the fact came up in the other books. But was that always something that you wanted to instill in Lucy? I don't know if it's a curiosity, or how did you sort of think about exploring that?
Well, in that sense, I am probably like Lucy because I have spent my entire life. The whole reason I'm a writer is that I understood at a very young age that I would never know what it was like to be another person. I mean, really, that I was only going to see the world through my own two eyes. And I've never forgotten when I realized that, because I was quite sad by that, recognition. And so I have always spent my entire life trying to figure out what it feels like to be another person. And with my writing, I'm always trying to do that, and watching people all the time, listening all the time, and just using my imagination to try and get into what it might feel like to be another person. And Lucy just puts it right out there.
Yeah, and I think the other thing I liked that it wasn't, there was that melancholy around it sometimes, but then she also had this great, I don't know if the word is awe, but just, she describes at one point, it says, the marriage was these surprises and disappointments. And there's a moment, I think, where William realizes like he didn't miss teaching. And she was almost like, oh, so neat that that was something I didn't know about him and he didn't know about it himself. But just this idea that
Right.
we could still surprise one another in ways.
Right. Oh, always. I think people are filled with surprises. Till the day they die, we're filled with surprises, that if we listen hard enough and think enough, I think we're always surprising or we can be surprised by someone no matter how much we feel we know them. Excuse me.
And I think too, the other thing that was interesting to me exploring was the idea of intimacy and comfort and coziness and safety and what Lucy saw in both of her husbands and got from their
Yeah.
relationships. And there was such a tenderness at moments that she, as a reader, I think you're kind of constantly comparing different characters and relationships, but there was such a tenderness that she had for each of them in a way. And I think like
Right.
the moment that just like broke my heart where she says something like, David would never in a million, he would never have laughed at me. And it's like,
Right. I
but then there's
know.
these other moments with William where you see what he brought to her.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know. I just thought it was really interesting how she was able to kind of toggle and see that in both of them.
Right. I when I first started with Lucy, I had before I understood that he married her because she was filled with joy, which was like that was the cap. But when I first started with her way back with My Name is Lucy Barton, I realized this is a really special person. And I think partly because of her background and partly because she was born who she was, there's an open-heartedness to her. I've always thought of Lucy as having almost a childlike open-heartedness to the world, you know, um, which makes her different in some ways.
No, I agree. And like even with her daughters, like there was the moment where one of her daughters tells her that she was planning to name her child Lucy. And it was like this moment to Lucy, like, oh my gosh, my daughter loves, like,
Yeah,
I'm a mom who could have a child named after her and she loves me.
I
Like,
know.
this incredible. Yeah, I don't know. I did. And also just, she really understood that the world was strange and strange things happen. And
Yes.
I love that about
Yes, Lucy does know that.
her too.
Yeah,
um, Grief is another big theme in the book, and there's an early, I think it might even be on the very first page. She's talking about grief. Grief is such a,
right.
oh, it is such a solitary thing. This is the terror of it, I think. It is like
Yeah,
sliding down the outside of a really long glass building while nobody sees you. And
yeah,
that to me was such a great such a great way of describing grief. And I think this idea of invisibility and visibility that Lucy plays with throughout, she has this another like great way of describing, like she talks about a cork board, and if every person was a pin on the cork board that she
right,
wouldn't even be there. um
right.
yeah, and I don't know, how did that kind of, maybe if you can speak a little bit to the grief piece first and what you wanted to explore in this book.
I think, I mean, the invisibility part is really interesting because I concentrate when I work. I just concentrate so hard on the person that I'm trying to write about. And I thought, okay, so Lucy came from a background where on many levels she was just not acknowledged. The only mirror in her room in her house was a tiny mirror above the bathroom sink. She doesn't even know what she looked like. And most of our mothers reflect back to us, and our fathers or good friends will reflect back to us who we are. But Lucy did not have that, and I find that so interesting. And I thought she would have to end up feeling like, where am I? Where, who, I mean, literally, am I even visible?
Yeah, and I think it was interesting too how she was constantly learning from the way other people reacted to her. So there's the moment when she's like, there's an airport situation gone wrong, and she's going to be caught in DC, and she ends up hitching a ride essentially
Right.
to a train with
Yeah.
this couple, and they're not particularly friendly to her. And this couple lives in Connecticut, and later on Lucy has a reading there, and the woman shows up and she is just, seems more smitten with Lucy and is very friendly. And Lucy has this moment,
Right.
she thought I was someone. And
Right.
um yeah, and I thought that was interesting, just Lucy's way of navigating the world and just noting the way people responded to her.
That's right. That's right. And the woman still wouldn't have known that Lucy stood there feeling like she was still invisible.
Yeah, and it is funny. And I think that comes up too in Anything Is Possible, not to derail us, but when she's talking to her brother and sister, and there's this great moment where her sister is kind of like, "Oh, you're just always acting so nice on the screen," and Lucy's like, "Sometimes I just want to like tell people to f off," And I thought that was
Right.
like such a
Right.
great moment too.
Right.
Um,
I mean, yeah, the multifacetedness of everybody basically, but of Lucy in that particular moment, you realize, oh yeah, she's like that as well.
totally, and just this idea that we're constantly getting people wrong in a way, and we're constantly projecting what we see onto them and
Right.
forgetting that that person is having this whole like interior dialogue or doubts,
That's yes,
insecurities that were.
exactly. And that has always also interested me as a writer, the our interior life coming up in banging into our exterior life. Because our exterior life is what most people see and what they're responding to in us. And yet all of us carry around, some sort of, I hope, an interior life as well. And so that collision is really interesting to me as a writer.
And I think
And
too,
for Lucy, the collision's, bigger than most.
yeah, and she has this moment where she says something like, so often like the people who are closest to us, we don't say what we actually mean or what we're doing. And I thought
Right.
that was really brought home in a lot of the dialogue with William, even just on the phone. Like Lucy would like ask a question at the very end of their conversation, and then he would start talking, and she would be like, "Oh, this is the reason that he called me in the
Right.
first place." Just like,
Right.
yeah, how often we have these misconnections, or we're kind of
Yeah.
hiding or being a little skittish about what it is we want to come and say.
Yeah, exactly. And when she meets that woman at the party who had gone to online to ijustwannatalk.com. I made that up. I mean, I don't think I never checked to see if there was one, but I just made it up because all of a sudden I thought, wait a second, what a great idea to have a website, ijustwannatalk.com, because I thought this is what Lucy would be understanding, that people, even ordinary people, which is, what Lucy is, and the people that she knows, are ordinary people, they still can't always say what it is they feel like they want to say.
Yeah. The other thing I really related to along those lines is I think she shares a story of a friend. William and her are sort of having this not as long debate, but just do people ever really choose what it is they choose to do? And Lucy it has this moment where she's remembering something a friend told her, where he's like, when I don't know what it is I want to do, I watch what I'm doing. And I
Exactly.
thought, wow, that's so true and she's talking in part about her decision or not to leave her
Or,
marriage with
right,
William.
to leave
And
William.
she realizes, in all of these small ways I was leaving. So I don't know. How,
Yeah.
how did you kind of come to that particular moment or passage or thought?
It was very interesting when because all of a sudden I recognized that as like a human thing. I mean, I thought to myself, wait a minute, wait a minute. This is true. I mean, I find it to be true that when we don't know what we're doing, if we watch what we're doing, that's what we're doing, sort of thing. So when I realized that, I thought, oh, let's have a friend tell her that, and she can remember it and realize that sounds true.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to ask you about is how you portrayed intimacy in the book as a family. There are these moments when it feels like it's such a treasure. And then I thought this passage I really related to, where you said something like it was a ghastly thing, like it could be suffocating at times to Lucy. And just knowing Lucy's history, like how did you think about her character arc and the way she would respond to intimacy over her life, in her romantic relationships with friends, with her kids? Was that something you kind of had to think about before you charted
Mm,
a course?
well, I mean, I think about it as I'm writing it. I mean, that's how I work it out, and a lot gets thrown away. But I try different things, and I realize, okay, this, Lucy would, I think in probably psychological terms, Lucy sort of dissociates when she marries William. I mean, I think that's what happened, and then, because the grief over having left her home hit her in a certain kind of way, and she couldn't seem to get out from under that. And then, she gets older, and when she marries her second husband, she is out from under it, and there's no issue in that. And yet Lucy wants to be intimate, and I think can be intimate. And William has his own intimacy problems, as we know. But so it was a going back and forth, because I think that many people, you can say, well, so and so has an intimacy problem, but then they actually can be quite intimate. So I think that all of us have these abilities to be very intimate under certain circumstances, and then maybe not so much under different circumstances. And so it was a juggling thing. And when she and the girls go back to William's apartment for that dinner that night, I was very, I'm sorry I wrote it, because I know I wrote it, but I was very moved by that scene, and I realized, oh look, they really had been a family. And that comes back for that moment. And then she can also say that at times she found intimacy to be ghastly with him. It's
Yeah,
all
and I
true.
think Yeah, and I think too there was also a humor and a levity to the way she saw it. She's recounting that moment where after she meets William's sister and she's kind of replaying like the sister asking like was something wrong with William, and she's like, of course something was wrong with William.
No, I
Um
know.
and um no, yeah, I don't know. I thought their relationship was so sweet, and I don't mean that in like a small way, but just even the moment with the pants where she eventually
Yeah,
said, "William, your pants are so short and it's depressing me." And it's this really fabulous moment because he's like, "Oh, look at Lucy Barton knowing like
I
if
know.
a pair of pants are tailored right." And yeah, it was just so them
Yeah,
in a way, and
I,
I think they both recognize that in each other. Like there were these moments when I was just like, "Oh, William, like that's
exactly.
so William."
But exactly. And what I loved most about that scene was that her panic just immediately left her, because he put his head back and he roared one of his laughters that he doesn't often roar, but he roared with laughter, and she was fine. Her panic left her. And I thought that was their relationship. It can end like that. I mean, the panic can end like that when he's responsive and laughs at himself and her.
Yeah, and I thought it was a nice tie into the other moment when, Lucy says David would have never in a million years laughed at her. And it's not that William is necessarily laughing at her in that moment, but it's
Right.
just their relationships were so different and they each
Yeah.
brought a different amount to them. Yeah, and this idea that, at the end there's the great metaphor with the light, that Lucy always thought there was a light across the way that was on, and it was such a comfort to her because she thought someone was there. And she eventually comes to find, no one was there across the way, like in the tower.
And
But it still was a comfort to her, and she's kind
it
of
was a comfort to
realizing,
her.
yeah, William was maybe not the comfort that the authority she thought he was, but it was still such a comfort.
But it almost doesn't matter, you know, if somebody
Yeah,
was in the tower or not. It doesn't really matter at the time that you're receiving comfort from it.
totally. Would you ever I'm sure you get this a lot, but would you ever revisit Lucy or William or anyone else from their collective again?
You know, let's just say, um, let's see. Let's wait and see. I
Um,
can't, I never can talk about what I'm working on, but we'll see.
okay.
So,
Um, no, yeah, and I mean, we haven't even talked about like all of William's family history, but that was an interesting. I mean, that's a whole feels like a whole another lineage to discover. But
right.
how How did William's sister come to you and Catherine's?
It was so interesting because a friend of mine, and I put him in the acknowledgments. A friend of mine happened to be talking to me one day about some stuff that he had discovered on Ancestry.com. I think that was the website he had used, but about his father who had long been dead. And my friend, was upset by some of the stuff that he had learned. And so all of a sudden I thought, oh, wait a minute. I kept hearing stories like that. And I thought, this is happening everywhere. As Becca, her daughter, says, this is happening everywhere. So all of a sudden I realized, okay. And then the timing would be perfect. And then I realized, okay, this is Catherine's secret. And then when I remember as I was getting ready to write the scene where Lucy is in that house talking to Lois Bubar, I thought it was so much like when I was a kid, I used to swim a lot, and I would go off the diving board, and I can remember taking those steps and getting ready to like do the dive. And that's how I felt before I wrote that scene with Lois Bubar. And I thought, okay, big breath, we're going to get ready, and then we're going to go and do this dive. But even as I was writing that scene, there were surprises that came to me as I was writing it, which is always a good thing, because if I'm not surprised, I don't think the reader will be. So there were things that showed up in that scene that I thought, oh, look, wait, okay.
No, I mean, I was very surprised that Catherine had reached out and she had never mentioned it.
Yeah,
And then I thought that she knew Lucy, she had read Lucy's book and had seen her coming. It was like, oh, of course, after the fact, but it was,
yeah,
I felt like Lucy, like I was taken by surprise too.
right. I was taken by surprise by that too. But all of a sudden I realized, wait a minute, there's that front door. They came through the back door. All of a sudden I could just picture Catherine walking through that front door, and I thought, oh, of course. And then it goes back to the summer that Lucy was in the hospital, and you realize, why wasn't her mother-in-law with her? And that's because she was running around up in Maine trying to find her lost child.
Yeah.
So
And it lent so much meaning to that phrase that she would say, Lucy comes from nothing. It was, yeah, Catherine.
exactly.
I would read a book about Catherine. She's got a
Yeah.
lot going on.
Oh my word, she really does. And yet, it's so funny because she's different from Lucy, and Lucy recognizes that. Like Catherine really did manage, or appeared to manage, to cross those class lines with more comfort than Lucy has ever felt. Lucy knows that she's crossed class lines, and she looks at her daughters and she realizes, I can't believe these daughters are so different from in one generation from what I came from. But she's never felt comfortable with it. And yet we sort of sense that Catherine was pretty comfortable doing this. She had her golf club, and her golf clubs and her friends at the club, and so it was interesting to think of how different people can manage these things or not.
Yeah, I mean, it was great. I don't know if it was Becca or Chrissy who said something like, they couldn't believe Catherine's childhood home when they found out how small it was, because they were like, Mom, but she golfed. And it's like,
Right.
yes,
Exactly.
she, but it was that and I think with the class, like I thought you did an amazing job of describing that, and Lucy's just bewilderment and discomfort when they go on vacation, and she has this moment and she actually calls her dad, and she's like, I think they're in Puerto
I
Rico, and she's like,
know.
I don't know what
I
to do,
know.
like hotel cards, like all of these things that are very
Yeah.
bizarre.
Foreign. They were completely foreign to somebody like Lucy. Everybody takes this stuff for granted, but you think, okay, if you're Lucy Barton, you've only been on one plane trip your life when your boyfriend flew you east. And now she has to get off and be at this fancy resort, and she doesn't know the language. She doesn't know the terms of engagement.
Mm. And I
So
think too, as you mentioned, she does it. You show how Lucy's almost amazement at her own daughters. Like she has this moment where they've taken, I think, their younger, their half sister to tea, and Lucy's like, of course they did, but how crazy, how
I
bizarre.
know, I know. So, I mean, the class stuff has always been interesting to me ever since Amy and Isabel, which is actually, also about class, which I didn't even realize until somebody pointed out to me after I'd written it. And then I realized, oh, of course it is. And then I'm interested in class. So, but the business of how some people can do it and some people can't was particularly interesting to me in this book.
Yeah. And Lucy's amazing, her her perspective on it was particularly interesting because like you said, she had realized that she had crossed and was crossing class lines but saw people doing it differently. So
Yeah,
her eyes on it was very, yeah, she very
yeah,
interesting.
yeah, yeah.
Before I let you go, what are you reading now or planning to read?
Well, I have been on a binge of reading all the biographies of the Russian writers. So I started with two different biographies of Tolstoy because I wanted to make sure that I was getting as full of story of him as I could. And then but I haven't done two of the rest of them, but I just got done with a biography of Gorky. So I think that will probably be it. And then I'm going to start a book about Polly Adler. Is that her name? She was one of the first madams in the jazz age. So
I love that you love biography so much, and I think it's an O. William, but I might be wrong. Where William is reading a biography, yeah, and I was
yeah,
like, oh, that feels like a very Liz touch.
yeah, it is. Yeah, right.
Well, thank you so much for being here today. So appreciate it. Thank you,
It was
everyone, for
just
tuning in to
lovely.
Goop Book Club, to Michael Kors for my Sitka frames. You guys can check them out in
Yeah,
the
great.
comments.
I love them.
Thank you. And we'll be back in January and we will announce our next pick then. But Liz, thank you again and talk to everyone soon.
Thank you so, so much. It was really
Bye.
lovely to be here. Okay,
Oh,
take
thank
care.
you.
Bye bye.